When my son Garrett threw that punch, I thought the worst part was the physical pain radiating through my jaw. I was wrong. The worst part was discovering the next morning that he'd been stealing from me for 3 years to fund his lavish lifestyle, and what I did about it changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun filters through the kitchen windows of my Riverside home, casting long shadows across the granite countertops where I've spent countless hours preparing family meals. The wedding invitation lies open before me, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing that probably cost more per piece than most people spend on groceries in a day. Garrett and his fiancée Penelope have outdone themselves, planning what can only be described as a royal wedding on a middle-class budget. "Mom, we need to talk." Garrett's voice carries that familiar tone of entitlement that's grown stronger since he graduated college 2 years ago. At 25, my son has never known financial struggle, never worked a job that didn't come through family connections, never faced the word no without finding a way around it. I look up from the invitation where I've been calculating numbers in my head. The venue alone costs more than I make in 6 months as a high school principal. "I've been looking at these wedding expenses, sweetheart. This seems quite ambitious." Garrett pulls out the chair across from me with more force than necessary, his designer watch catching the light. When did he start wearing such expensive accessories? His job at the marketing firm barely covers his apartment rent, yet he drives a BMW and wears clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "That's what I want to discuss," he says, sliding a manila folder across the table. "We've done all the planning, booked everything, and we just need a small loan to cover the final payments." I open the folder and my breath catches. The total isn't small by any definition, $85,000. My hands tremble slightly as I flip through itemized lists. A designer wedding dress, a destination bachelor party in Miami, a 7-course dinner for 300 guests, a live band that apparently charges more than I earn in a year. "Garrett, this is more than I make annually before taxes." His expression hardens, a look I've seen increasingly over the past few years whenever reality conflicts with his expectations. "It's just a loan, Mom. Penelope's family is contributing their share. We'll pay you back after the wedding when we combine our finances." I study my son's face, searching for the little boy who used to help me bake cookies and apologize profusely when he accidentally broke something. This man sitting across from me feels like a stranger wearing my child's features. "How exactly will you pay me back? Your salary barely covers your current expenses." "We'll figure it out." He waves his hand dismissively. "Penelope's getting promoted soon, and I'm expecting a raise. Besides, what else are you going to spend your retirement savings on?" The casual assumption in his voice, that my life's savings belong to him by default, sends a chill through me. "Those savings are for my retirement, Garrett. I can't just—" "Can't what?" His voice rises, echoing off the kitchen tiles. "Can't help your only son on the most important day of his life? Do you know what Penelope's parents think when I tell them my mother won't contribute to our wedding? I never said I wouldn't contribute. But $85,000 would drain my retirement account completely." Garrett stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is unbelievable. Trevor's mom bought him and Rachel a house as a wedding gift. Jennifer's parents paid for their entire honeymoon to Europe. And you're worried about helping your son have one perfect day?" His words hit me like physical blows. When did my love become measured purely in dollar amounts? When did my worth as a mother become determined by my bank account balance? "I've already sacrificed so much for you," I say quietly. "Your college tuition, your car, the down payment on your apartment when you couldn't qualify for a lease." "That's what parents do." Garrett's face flushes red. "That's literally your job as my mother." I stand slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. "My job was to raise you to be independent and responsible. Somewhere along the way, I failed." The silence stretches between us, heavy with years of unspoken resentment and misplaced expectations. Outside, I can hear Mrs. Patterson watering her garden, the normal sounds of suburban evening routines continuing while my world tilts on its axis. "So that's it?" Garrett's voice drops to a dangerous whisper. "You're just going to let me down? Embarrass me in front of Penelope's family? Ruin the most important day of our lives because you're too selfish to help your own son?" "I'm not being selfish, Garrett. I'm being realistic." That's when everything changes. The mask of civilized discussion drops completely from his face, replaced by something I've never seen before. Pure rage directed at me, his mother, who gave him life and spent 25 years nurturing and protecting him. "You selfish bitch," he snarls, and before I can process the words, his fist connects with my jaw. The impact sends me stumbling backward into the kitchen counter, my hips striking the edge with enough force to leave what I'll later discover is a dark purple bruise. The metallic taste of blood fills my mouth as I slide down to the floor, more from shock than the physical blow. Garrett stands over me, his chest heaving, his knuckles already showing signs of swelling. For a moment, neither of us speaks. The only sound is the kitchen clock ticking and my own ragged breathing. "Look what you made me do," he says finally, his voice now eerily calm. "If you had just said yes, none of this would have happened." As I sit on my kitchen floor, tasting blood and feeling the throb in my jaw, I realize that this moment, this terrible defining moment, is actually a gift. The mask has finally fallen away completely, revealing who my son truly is, beneath the charm and manipulation. But I don't know yet that this is only the beginning. I don't know that tomorrow morning I'll discover evidence that will make this punch seem like the least of his betrayals. I don't know that by this time next week I'll understand that raising Garrett wasn't my greatest failure. Enabling him was. All I know right now is that something fundamental has broken between us. And unlike the crystal vase he shattered when he was 7, this can never be repaired with glue and loving forgiveness. The real education is about to begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before that punch shattered everything, I believed I was living proof that single motherhood could create something beautiful. My life in Riverside had been carefully constructed around one central purpose: giving Garrett every opportunity I never had growing up in the cramped apartments of Millfield's East Side. The morning routine that had sustained us for over 2 decades began at 5:30 a.m. sharp. I'd brew coffee in the kitchen where yesterday's violence would later unfold, pack my lunch in the same refrigerator that displayed Garrett's honor roll certificates and baseball trophies like shrine artifacts. By 6:15, I was dressed in one of my 7 professional blazers, a modest wardrobe that I rotated carefully to maintain the appearance of success that my position as principal of Riverside High demanded. My colleagues knew me as Patricia Pat Morrison, the woman who turned around the district's most challenging school through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to connect with troubled teenagers. What they didn't know was that every success story I celebrated at school felt like practice for the masterpiece I was creating at home, raising Garrett to be everything I dreamed of becoming myself. The house on Maple Street wasn't grand by Riverside standards, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a small yard where Garrett had learned to throw a baseball and later practiced his graduation speech. I'd bought it when he was 8, stretching my teacher's salary to its absolute limit, because I wanted him to have an address that opened doors instead of closing them. Every month for 17 years, I'd sat at that same kitchen table, carefully balancing the mortgage payment against groceries, utilities, and Garrett's endless stream of activities. Piano lessons at 7, baseball camp at 9, SAT prep courses at 16, college application fees at 17. Each expense felt like an investment in his future, in the life I'd never been able to build for myself. The photo albums lining the living room bookshelf told the story I'd spent decades writing. Garrett's first steps, taken in this very house. His high school graduation, where he'd been valedictorian. His college acceptance letter to Westfield University, mounted and framed like a diploma. In every image, I stood beside him, sometimes in the background, always supporting, perpetually proud. My friends often marveled at our relationship. "You're so lucky," Dorothy from the teacher's lounge would say. "Garrett still calls you every Sunday. My kids barely remember my birthday." And it was true. Even after he'd moved out 2 years ago, our weekly phone calls had been the highlight of my week. He'd tell me about his job at Brennan Marketing, his apartment in the trendy Riverside Heights district, his growing relationship with Penelope. Penelope Ashworth had seemed like a dream come true when Garrett first brought her home for dinner 8 months ago. Blonde, polished from one of Riverside's established families. The Ashworths owned 3 restaurants downtown and a small chain of boutique hotels. She'd complimented my cooking, admired the family photos, and listened with apparent fascination as I told stories about Garrett's childhood achievements. "You raised such an incredible man, Mrs. Morrison," she'd said that first evening, her manicured hand resting on Garrett's arm. "You can see the values you instilled in him in everything he does." Those words had filled me with such warmth, such validation. Here was proof that my sacrifices had mattered, that the countless nights I'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table grading papers to earn extra income for his college fund had produced exactly the man I'd hoped to raise. The engagement announcement had come 3 months later, delivered over Sunday dinner at Romano's, our traditional mother-son restaurant since he was 12. Garrett had been unusually nervous, fidgeting with his napkin as we waited for our appetizers. "Mom, Penelope and I have something to tell you," he'd said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "We're engaged." The ring had been stunning, a 2-carat diamond that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting like a small star. My first thought hadn't been about the cost, though I'd wondered briefly how he'd afforded it on his salary. My first thought had been pure joy. My son had found love with a wonderful woman who appreciated the man I'd raised him to be. "I'm so happy for you both," I'd said, tears blurring my vision as I hugged them. "When are you thinking of having the wedding?" "Next summer," Penelope had answered, her excitement infectious. "We want something really special, something that celebrates both our families coming together." Over the following months, I'd watched them plan with the enthusiasm of 2 people who'd never had to consider budget constraints. They'd visit venue after venue, each more expensive than the last. They'd spend weekends tasting cakes, sampling floral arrangements, auditioning bands. Every Sunday phone call brought new updates about photographers who charged more than I spent on my car, or menu tastings that cost what I typically spent on groceries for a month. But I'd smiled and nodded and offered encouragement, because wasn't this what I'd worked for? Wasn't this the life I'd wanted him to have? One where money wasn't a constant constraint, where dreams could become reality through planning and determination rather than sacrifice and struggle? The warning signs had been there, subtle but present for anyone paying attention. Garrett's increasing irritation when I mentioned budgets or practical concerns. His casual dismissal of my financial limitations as temporary inconveniences rather than permanent realities. The way he'd begun to speak about money as though it were unlimited, as though wanting something was the same as deserving it. 3 weeks before that terrible evening in my kitchen, we'd had lunch at the new bistro downtown, Garrett's choice, naturally. He'd ordered the most expensive entree without glancing at the price, paid with a credit card I didn't recognize, and spent most of the meal describing the wedding plans in detail. "The venue alone is going to be incredible, Mom. The Grandview Estate has those gardens that overlook the river, and they're including full catering service and a bridal suite for the night before. Penelope's so excited she can barely sleep." I'd listened, calculating numbers in my head despite myself. The venue, the catering, the photography, the band, the flowers. Each item he mentioned casually represented more money than I typically spent in months. "It sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I'd said carefully. "How are you managing to afford all of this?" His expression had shifted slightly, the first cloud across his sunny enthusiasm. "We're handling it, Mom. Penelope's parents are contributing, and we've got everything figured out." That should have been the end of it. I should have trusted him, believed in his financial planning the way I'd always believed in his intelligence and capability. But something in his tone, in the way he'd avoided direct eye contact when discussing money, had planted a seed of concern. Still, I'd pushed the worry aside. This was Garrett, my responsible, brilliant son, the boy who'd never missed a homework assignment, never lied to me about his whereabouts, never given me reason to doubt his judgment. If he said he had everything figured out, then surely he did. The morning of our confrontation, I'd been looking forward to seeing the final wedding plans. I'd even stopped by the bakery on my way home from school to pick up those chocolate croissants he'd loved since childhood, a small celebration for the exciting conversation I thought we were about to have. I'd imagined us sitting together at the kitchen table, spreading out vendor contracts and timelines, maybe discussing what I could contribute within my modest means. Perhaps a small gift toward the honeymoon, or an offer to host the rehearsal dinner at the house. What I hadn't imagined was that my son had already decided exactly what I would contribute, down to the dollar. What I hadn't imagined was that my role in his wedding wasn't as his supportive mother, but as his personal bank. What I definitely hadn't imagined was that refusing to drain my retirement savings would transform the gentle, loving son I'd raised into someone capable of violence against the woman who'd given him everything. But perhaps the most devastating realization was still to come, understanding that the man who struck me that evening wasn't a stranger wearing my son's face. He was exactly who Garrett had always been, and I'd simply been too blinded by love to see it. The bruise on my jaw throbs as I lie awake at 3:17 a.m., staring at the ceiling fan that's been making that slight clicking sound for months. I've been meaning to fix it, the way I've been meaning to address so many small details that have been nagging at the edges of my consciousness. But now, in the darkness of my bedroom, those nagging details feel less like minor inconveniences, and more like pieces of a puzzle I've been afraid to assemble. My jaw aches when I swallow, a constant reminder of yesterday's violence, but it's not the physical pain keeping me awake. It's the replay of Garrett's words echoing in my mind. "Look what you made me do." The phrase sits in my stomach like spoiled food, making me nauseous every time I remember the casual way he'd shifted blame for his actions onto me. I reach for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. 3 missed calls from Garrett, all after midnight, no voicemails, just the persistent attempts to reach me, as if nothing had happened, as if his fist hadn't connected with my face just hours earlier. The audacity of it, expecting immediate forgiveness, expecting me to answer his calls after what he'd done, sends a chill through me that has nothing to do with the October air seeping through my bedroom windows. Rising carefully from bed, I catch my reflection in the dresser mirror. The bruise along my jawline has deepened to an ugly purple-black, the swelling making my face look lopsided. I'll need makeup to cover this at school tomorrow. No, today. The clock reads 3:23 a.m. now. In 4 hours, I'll need to stand in front of Riverside High's faculty and pretend everything is normal, while my son's violence is literally written across my face. I pad downstairs to the kitchen, avoiding the spot where I'd fallen just 12 hours ago. The manila folder still sits on the table where Garrett had left it, its contents scattered across the surface. $85,000 itemized in neat columns, each expense representing a level of luxury I'd never imagined seeking for myself, let alone demanding from someone else. The wedding dress alone costs $4,800, more than I spend on clothing in 2 years. The venue rental, $22,000 for a single day. The photographer, $6,000 for someone Penelope had found through a Manhattan wedding magazine. Every line item represents more money than I typically see at once. Yet Garrett had presented it as though these were reasonable, expected expenses. But it's not the amounts that make my hands shake as I flip through the pages. It's the dates. The contracts are all signed, deposits already paid. This isn't a request for a loan, it's a demand for reimbursement. They've already spent money they didn't have, banking on my compliance, on my inability to say no to my son's happiness. My laptop sits closed on the kitchen counter, and for the first time in months, I feel compelled to check something I've been avoiding. My online banking password feels foreign under my fingers as I log into my accounts. The screen loads slowly, and when the numbers appear, my breath catches. My checking account shows a balance that's $300 lower than it should be. Not a catastrophic amount, but enough to notice. I scroll through the recent transactions, looking for the discrepancy. There, an ATM withdrawal I didn't make from a location near Garrett's apartment complex. My debit card is in my purse upstairs. I checked it earlier when I was looking for something to distract myself from the pain in my jaw. A cold understanding begins to creep through me. I click over to my savings account, the one I've been building methodically for 20 years. The balance should be $47,218. Instead, it shows $44,912. $2,300 missing from my savings account. Transferred out in increments over the past 6 months. Amounts small enough that they wouldn't trigger alerts, large enough to add up to significant money. The transfer dates don't correspond to any financial emergency. I remember Garrett mentioning. They're just gone. My hands are trembling now as I navigate to my credit card account. The card I keep for emergencies, the one with the $15,000 limit that I've never used except for major home repairs. The balance shows $8,743. Charges I didn't make stretch back months. High-end restaurants, a jewelry store in downtown Riverside, a men's clothing boutique, charges from Miami that coincide with what Garrett had mentioned was his bachelor party trip. My emergency credit card has been funding my son's lifestyle for months, and I never noticed because I never checked the statements carefully enough. The bachelor party alone cost nearly $3,000. Charged to my card while I was working late into the evening grading papers and planning next week's assembly about financial literacy for our junior class. The irony would be laughable if it weren't so devastating. I sit back in my kitchen chair, the same chair where I'd calculated my modest contribution to Garrett's wedding just yesterday, and try to process what I'm seeing. This isn't impulsive spending or poor planning. This is systematic theft. My son has been stealing from me for months, maybe longer, financing his life with my retirement savings while I've been budgeting carefully to afford basic necessities. The ATM withdrawals start making sense now. Small amounts, taken regularly, always from locations near his apartment or workplace. Never enough to trigger overdraft fees or alerts. Just enough to provide him with spending money while his salary went toward maintaining the expensive lifestyle he'd somehow convinced himself he deserved. But it's the credit card charges that make me feel physically sick. The jewelry store purchase for nearly $2,000. That was probably Penelope's engagement ring. The ring I'd admired, thinking my son had saved carefully to afford such a beautiful symbol of his love. Instead, he'd stolen the money from his mother, the woman who'd sacrificed her own jewelry, her own luxuries to ensure he had everything he needed growing up. The restaurant charges tell a story of someone living well beyond his means while his mother packed lunch every day to save money. The clothing purchases paint a picture of a man who cared more about his appearance than his integrity. And the Miami bachelor party, charged to my emergency fund while I'd been telling colleagues I couldn't afford to join them for dinner because money was tight. My phone buzzes again, another call from Garrett. This time, he leaves a voicemail. "Mom, I know you're upset, but we need to talk about this rationally. I overreacted earlier, but you have to understand how stressed I am about the wedding. Penelope's family is expecting certain things, and I can't let them down. The loan is still on the table. We really need your help here. Call me back." The casual dismissal of his violence as an overreaction makes my stomach turn. But it's the continuation of his financial demands that reveals the true depth of his disconnection from reality. He's stolen thousands of dollars from me, physically assaulted me when I refused to give him more, and his primary concern is still getting access to my remaining savings. I hang up without listening to the message again. Instead, I pull out a legal pad and begin writing down every suspicious transaction, every unexplained withdrawal, Every charge that doesn't belong to me. The list grows longer than I'd expected, painting a picture of financial abuse that's been ongoing for months. The jewelry store charge was in March, 2 weeks before he'd proposed to Penelope. The expensive dinners correspond to dates when he'd told me about important business meetings he needed to impress clients. The clothing purchases align with job interviews and work events he'd described as crucial for his career advancement. Every theft had been justified in his mind by some imagined necessity, some storyline where taking my money was not only acceptable, but required. By 4:30 a.m., I have 3 pages of fraudulent charges totaling over $11,000. Money taken from my accounts while I've been wearing the same work clothes for 3 years, driving a car with 180,000 miles because I couldn't afford a newer one, declining social invitations because restaurant meals weren't in my budget. The scale of his betrayal is staggering, but what's worse is the realization that this discovery is probably just the beginning. If Garrett has been this brazen with my bank accounts, if he's felt this entitled to my money, what else might he have done? What other boundaries has he crossed while I've been trusting him completely, believing in the image of the son I thought I'd raised? As dawn begins to creep through my kitchen windows, I realize that yesterday's punch wasn't an isolated incident of lost temper. It was the natural escalation of someone who's been taking from me for months, someone who's come to see my resources as his by right rather than by gift. The violence was just what happened when his usual methods of extraction were suddenly threatened. I close my laptop and gather the fraudulent transaction records into a neat pile. The evidence is clear, documented, undeniable. My son is a thief. But more than that, he's someone who's been comfortable stealing from the person who's sacrificed the most for him. Someone who could look me in the eye every Sunday and ask about my week while knowing he'd been robbing me blind. The woman who went to bed last night was a mother who'd been punched by her ungrateful son. The woman sitting in this kitchen at sunrise is someone whose entire understanding of her relationship with her child has been shattered by mathematical proof of his betrayal. And somewhere between those two versions of myself lies the person I'm going to become, someone who no longer confuses love with enabling, someone who understands the difference between supporting and being stolen from. But I still don't know how deep this goes. I still don't know what other discoveries are waiting to be uncovered. All I know is that the life I thought I was living, the story I thought we were writing together, was built on lies that are now impossible to ignore. The concealer isn't working as well as I'd hoped. Even with 2 layers of the heaviest makeup I own, the bruise along my jawline shows through like a shadow that refuses to disappear. I practice smiling in my bathroom mirror, testing different angles to see which position makes the discoloration least obvious. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm literally putting on a mask to hide my son's violence so I can go to work and teach other people's children about integrity and respect. By 6:45 a.m., I'm sitting in my car in the school parking lot, gathering courage for what I know will be a day of performance. My phone shows 2 more missed calls from Garrett, but I've learned to silence the ringer. Each time it lights up with his name, my jaw throbs as if responding to his presence even through technology. The school day passes in a blur of careful positioning, keeping my left side turned away from conversations, speaking softly to avoid aggravating the soreness, declining the usual lunch invitation from Dorothy because I can't risk her noticing the bruise and asking questions I'm not ready to answer. But it's during my planning period while my students are at lunch that I finally allow myself to make the call I've been avoiding. Riverside First National Bank, customer service. This is Amanda speaking. My voice sounds steadier than I feel. Hi, I need to inquire about some unauthorized transactions on my accounts. I'm Patricia Morrison. Account number. I recite the numbers I've memorized since childhood, when my mother used to make me repeat our account information in case of emergencies. I'll be happy to help you with that, Mrs. Morrison. Can you verify your social security number and mother's maiden name? The security questions feel like a ritual of protection I should have invoked months ago. After I'm verified, Amanda's tone becomes more serious. What specific transactions are you questioning? I read through my list methodically, the ATM withdrawals, the savings transfers, the credit card charges. With each item, Amanda asks for dates and amounts, and I realize how extensive the documentation needs to be. This isn't a simple mistake or a single fraudulent charge. This is a comprehensive pattern that will require comprehensive investigation. Mrs. Morrison, based on what you're describing, I'm going to transfer you to our fraud investigation department. This sounds like it could be identity theft or unauthorized access to your accounts. They'll need to walk you through the formal dispute process. 20 minutes later, I'm speaking with Detective Sarah Chen from the fraud department. Not the Chen I was told not to use, but a different person entirely who speaks with the measured professionalism of someone who's heard this story too many times. The good news is that we can see these transactions clearly on our end, Detective Chen explains. The ATM withdrawals show video surveillance, and the credit card charges have digital trails. The concerning part is that whoever did this had access to your debit card information and knew your PIN number. Do you have any idea how someone might have obtained that information? The question I've been dreading sits in my throat like a stone. It might be my son. The pause on Detective Chen's end tells me this isn't unusual. Family member fraud is unfortunately quite common, Mrs. Morrison. Can you tell me about his access to your financial information? I close my office door and speak quietly, even though my students won't return for another 15 minutes. He's lived in my house until 2 years ago. He's seen me enter my PIN at stores. He knows where I keep important documents. When he moved out, I gave him a spare key in case of emergencies. Has he had any recent financial pressures or major expenses? He's getting married next month. The wedding is expensive. I find myself understating even now, trying to minimize the scope of Garrett's demands, even as I report his crimes. Detective Chen takes detailed notes about the timeline, the amounts, and Garrett's access to my information. She explains that the bank can begin provisional credit for the fraudulent charges while they investigate, but that I'll need to file an official police report if I want to pursue criminal charges. I understand this is difficult when it involves family, she says gently, but I want you to understand that this appears to be systematic theft, not impulsive overspending. The small amounts, the regular timing, the use of multiple account types. This shows planning and intent to deceive. After I hang up, I sit in my empty office and try to process what I've just done. By calling the bank, I've crossed a line from private family crisis to public legal matter. There will be paperwork, investigations, possibly court proceedings. The knowledge that my son is a criminal will no longer be something I carry alone. But I'm not finished seeking answers. During my lunch break, I drive to Garrett's apartment complex, a modern development in Riverside Heights that I've always admired for its sleek architecture and well-maintained grounds. As I park outside Building C, I realize I've never questioned how he affords this place on his salary. The apartments here rent for at least $1,800 a month, more than half of what Garrett makes at the marketing firm even before taxes. Add in his car payment, insurance, utilities, and basic living expenses, and the mathematics become impossible. His lifestyle has never made sense with his income, but I'd assumed he was managing money better than I had at his age, maybe getting help from Penelope's family, or finding creative ways to budget. Now I understand the creative budgeting involved stealing from his mother. I don't go up to his apartment. I'm not ready for another confrontation, but I do walk through the complex's amenities. The fitness center with its expensive equipment, the pool area with its resort-style landscaping, the business center with its high-end computers and printing services. This is luxury living, and it's been subsidized by my retirement savings without my knowledge or consent. My next stop is Brennan Marketing, the downtown firm where Garrett works. I don't go inside, but I park across the street and watch employees coming and going during their lunch hour. Young professionals in expensive suits, carrying designer coffee cups, driving cars that cost more than I make in a year. It's a world where appearances matter more than substance, where projecting success is often more important than achieving it. A text comes through while I'm sitting there. Mom, we need to talk. This silent treatment isn't helping anyone. The wedding is in 3 weeks and we have final payments due. Please call me back. The audacity takes my breath away. Final payments due, as if his theft of my money wasn't enough, as if the punch to my face was just a minor disagreement we need to move past so he can continue extracting resources from me. The text reveals how completely he misunderstands what's happening. He thinks this is about hurt feelings and wedding stress, not criminal behavior and fundamental betrayal. I drive to the Grandview estate next, the venue where Garrett and Penelope plan to hold their wedding. It's even more impressive in person than in the photos. Rolling grounds overlooking the Riverside River, a restored Victorian mansion with wraparound porches and crystal chandeliers visible through tall windows. The kind of place that appears in luxury wedding magazines. The kind of venue that costs more for one day than most people spend on housing in a year. A wedding coordinator is showing the grounds to another couple, and I follow at a distance, listening as she describes the packages and pricing. The basic rental fee is $15,000, not including catering, flowers, or any of the add-on services. The couple she's touring looks wealthy. Designer clothing, expensive jewelry, the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to check price tags. But that's not who Garrett is. That's not the family he comes from. His father left when Garrett was 3, providing no financial support and minimal emotional presence. I've worked 2 jobs at various points in his childhood, saved every spare dollar for his education and opportunities, lived modestly so he could have more. We're not the kind of people who spend a year's salary on a single party, no matter how meaningful the celebration. Yet here he is, not just dreaming about this lifestyle but actively living it, funded by systematically stealing from the woman who sacrificed her own dreams to give him better opportunities. I sit in my car outside the Grandview estate and call Penelope's mother, Mrs. Ashworth. We've only met a few times, but she's always been polite, if somewhat reserved. Her voice, when she answers, sounds genuinely pleased to hear from me. Patricia, how lovely to hear from you. I imagine you're as excited about the wedding as we are. Just 3 weeks now. Actually, I'm calling because I'm concerned about some of the expenses, I say carefully. I'm wondering if you might help me understand how Garrett and Penelope are managing the costs for everything. There's a pause, and when Mrs. Ashworth speaks again, her tone has shifted slightly. Well, we're contributing what we can, of course. The rehearsal dinner, the flowers, and we're helping with the honeymoon. But I assumed you were covering the venue and catering since that's the larger portion. Penelope mentioned that you were so generous, wanting to give Garrett the wedding of his dreams. My blood turns cold. I'm sorry, what did Penelope tell you exactly? That you insisted on paying for the venue rental and the reception dinner. She was so touched by your generosity, especially since Garrett mentioned you've been setting aside money specifically for his wedding for years. The lies are so comprehensive, so detailed, that I feel dizzy sitting in my car. Not only has Garrett been stealing from me, but he's been using my supposed generosity as social currency, earning gratitude and respect from Penelope's family based on fictional contributions. Mrs. Ashworth, I need to be honest with you. I haven't agreed to pay for any of those expenses. In fact, I only learned the total cost yesterday, and it's far beyond what I can afford. The silence on the other end of the line stretches uncomfortably long. When she finally speaks, her voice is strained. I'm not sure I understand. Penelope has been telling us for months that you were handling the major expenses. She showed us text messages from Garrett confirming your contributions. My hands are shaking now. There are no text messages from me about wedding contributions. I think there may be some significant misunderstandings about the financial arrangements. After I hang up, I sit in the parking lot and try to comprehend the scope of what I've discovered. Garrett hasn't just been stealing my money. He's been lying to his fiancée and her family about my involvement, creating an elaborate fiction where I'm the generous mother funding his dream wedding. He's committed identity theft, financial fraud, and constructed a web of lies that involves multiple families and thousands of dollars in obligations. The seeking answers phase has revealed something far worse than I'd imagined. This isn't just a son who made poor financial choices or lost his temper under stress. This is someone who's been systematically deceiving everyone in his life, using my identity and my money to construct a false version of himself and our relationship. But the most chilling realization is still forming. If he's been this deceptive about money, this manipulative about family relationships, this willing to commit crimes to maintain his image, what else might he be capable of? What other lies am I about to discover? And what will he do when he realizes that his carefully constructed house of cards is about to collapse? The manila envelope arrives via courier at 4:30 p.m., just as I'm finishing my final administrative tasks for the day. The return address shows Ashworth and Associates Legal Services, Penelope's uncle's law firm. My hands tremble as I sign for it, already knowing that whatever's inside will shatter what remains of my illusions about my son. Inside are photocopies of documents I've never seen before, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, credit applications bearing my forged signature, loan documents with my personal information but handwriting that's clearly not mine. The cover letter from attorney Michael Ashworth is brief and devastating. Mrs. Morrison, after our phone conversation yesterday, Penelope asked me to investigate the financial arrangements for the wedding. What we discovered requires immediate legal attention. Please review the enclosed documents and contact my office at your earliest convenience. The first document stops my breathing entirely. It's a credit card application for a premium rewards card with a $30,000 limit, submitted 3 months ago in my name. The signature is a careful forgery of mine, and the income listed is nearly triple what I actually make. The address is Garrett's apartment, but the Social Security number is unmistakably mine. The application was approved, and the subsequent statements show charges that make my earlier discoveries look minor. $15,000 at Goldsmith's Jewelry, not just for Penelope's engagement ring, but for matching wedding bands and what appears to be an expensive watch. $8,000 at Romano's Catering for the rehearsal dinner. $12,000 at Elegant Affairs for wedding decorations and florals. But it's the pattern of cash advances that makes me physically ill. Regular withdrawals of the maximum daily amount, always from ATMs near high-end establishments where Garrett and Penelope have been spending money they don't have on a lifestyle they can't afford. The total debt on this card alone is $27,400, nearly 2/3 of my annual salary charged to my name without my knowledge. The second document is even worse. It's a personal loan application from Riverside Community Bank for $50,000, ostensibly for home renovations and debt consolidation. My signature is forged here too, but more skillfully than on the credit card application. Garrett has been practicing. The loan was approved 6 weeks ago, and the entire amount was deposited into an account jointly held by Garrett Morrison and Penelope Ashworth. $50,000 borrowed against my credit, my reputation, my future financial stability, to fund a wedding I wasn't even invited to contribute to, honestly. The monthly payment on this loan alone would be $830, more than I spend on groceries and utilities combined. I call Attorney Ashworth's office with shaking fingers. His secretary puts me through immediately, as if they've been expecting my call. Mrs. Morrison, thank you for calling so quickly. I'm afraid the situation is more serious than we initially understood. His voice carries the weight of someone delivering terminal diagnoses. These documents represent multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, forgery. The total amount of debt created in your name appears to exceed $80,000 across multiple institutions. $80,000. The number echoes in my mind as I sink into my office chair. It's more than I make in a year, more than I have in all my savings combined, more than I could pay back in a decade even if I dedicated every spare dollar to debt service. There's something else, Attorney Ashworth continues. Penelope has been completely unaware of the fraud. She believed these were legitimate financial arrangements you'd made to support the wedding. In fact, Garrett has been showing her fabricated text messages and emails supposedly from you, expressing enthusiasm about contributing to their special day. The fabricated communications. The thought that my son has been impersonating me, creating fictional conversations where I express joy about financial contributions I never agreed to make, adds a layer of violation that goes beyond mere theft. It's identity theft in the most personal sense. He's been stealing not just my money, but my voice, my expressed love and support, using forgeries of my own words to manipulate his fiancée. I need to see those messages, I say. Penelope is preparing copies for you. She's devastated, Mrs. Morrison. She had no idea that Garrett was capable of this level of deception. She thought you were the most generous future mother-in-law imaginable. After ending the call, I sit alone in my office as the October sun sets outside my windows, painting the room in the kind of golden light that usually brings me peace. Instead, I feel hollow, scraped clean by the relentless revelations of my son's crimes. My desk phone rings, and I consider not answering. But when I see it's Detective Chen from the bank's fraud department, I know this conversation can't be postponed. Mrs. Morrison, we've completed our preliminary investigation into the accounts you reported. Unfortunately, the scope of fraudulent activity is significantly larger than what you initially reported. We've identified 7 different financial institutions where accounts have been opened or loans approved using your personal information. 7 institutions. The number feels surreal. How is that possible? How did he get approved for so much credit? Your son appears to have been building this scheme gradually over more than a year. He started with small credit cards, made minimum payments to establish a pattern of responsibility, then used those accounts as references for larger credit lines. He's also been intercepting mail sent to your address. We found evidence that several financial statements were redirected to a post office box rented under your name. The post office box explains why I never received statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Garrett has been systematically intercepting evidence of his crimes, ensuring I remained unaware until the debts became too large to manage discreetly. The total fraudulent debt we've identified so far is $93,412. $93,000. Nearly twice my annual salary. Nearly double what I have in retirement savings. If I were held responsible for these debts, I would be financially ruined, unable to retire, possibly forced to sell my home and start over at 52 years old. What happens now? I ask, surprised by how steady my voice sounds. You'll need to file a police report for identity theft. We'll provide provisional credit while the investigation continues, but you'll need to work with law enforcement to pursue criminal charges. I have to tell you, Mrs. Morrison, this is one of the most comprehensive family fraud cases I've seen. The systematic nature of it suggests your son has been planning this for a very long time. A very long time. As I process Detective Chen's words, I realize that Garrett's financial crimes began long before he got engaged, possibly before he even met Penelope. This wasn't desperate wedding spending. This was a lifestyle choice, a decision to live beyond his means with the assumption that he could manipulate and steal from his mother indefinitely. My phone buzzes with a text from Penelope. Mrs. Morrison, can we meet tomorrow? I have some things to show you that I think you need to see. I'm so sorry about everything. The fact that Penelope wants to meet, that she's apologizing for crimes she didn't commit, highlights another dimension of Garrett's betrayal. He hasn't just stolen from me. He's used his fraud to manipulate an innocent woman into believing she was marrying someone generous and loved, someone whose family was excited to contribute to their happiness. Instead, she's marrying a criminal who's been forging his mother's signature and identity to fund their relationship. The engagement ring on her finger was purchased with stolen money. The romantic dinners they've shared were paid for with fraudulent credit cards. The vacation photos they've posted on social media were financed through identity theft. Their entire relationship, at least the financial foundation of it, has been built on crimes committed against the woman who raised him. But perhaps the most devastating realization is that this explains everything I've been trying to rationalize for months. Garrett's expensive tastes, his casual attitude toward money, his irritation when I mentioned budget constraints, none of it was about entitlement or poor planning. It was about a man who'd been systematically stealing from his mother for over a year, someone who'd come to view my financial resources as his personal bank account. The punch he threw wasn't the action of a stressed son losing his temper. It was the violence of a criminal whose victim had finally discovered his crimes and threatened to cut off his source of funding. As I gather the documents spread across my desk, I understand that tomorrow's meeting with Penelope will reveal even more painful truths. If Garrett has been forging my communications to her, if he's been lying about my enthusiasm for their wedding, what other deceptions will come to light? The son I thought I raised, the responsible, loving, successful young man I was so proud of, never existed. The man who struck me in my kitchen, who stole nearly $100,000 in my name, who forged my signature and intercepted my mail and impersonated my voice to manipulate his fiancée. That's who Garrett really is. And the most terrifying question remains: what will he do when he realizes that his carefully constructed world of lies and theft is collapsing around him? What violence is someone capable of when they're facing felony charges, prison time, and the complete destruction of the false identity they've spent years building? I lock the documents in my desk drawer and head home, knowing that tomorrow will bring even more painful revelations, but also knowing that each truth uncovered is a step toward justice and freedom from the son who's been systematically destroying my life while I've been celebrating his success. The coffee shop where I meet Penelope is deliberately public, a busy downtown location called the Daily Grind, where the ambient noise of conversation and espresso machines will mask any emotional outbursts. I arrive 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a view of the entrance so I can see her coming. My jaw still aches, though the bruise has faded enough that careful makeup application almost hides it. Penelope enters at exactly 10 a.m., punctual as always, but everything else about her appearance shocks me. The polished confidence I've always associated with her is gone. Her usually perfect blonde hair is pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face is bare of makeup, and she's wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the designer outfits that were her signature. Most telling of all, her engagement ring is missing from her left hand. She spots me immediately and walks over with the careful movements of someone who's been crying for days. When she sits down across from me, I can see that her eyes are red-rimmed and swollen. "Mrs. Morrison, I don't even know how to begin," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "I brought everything I have." She places a thick manila folder on the table between us, and I can see her hands shaking. "Before I show you this, I need you to know that I had no idea. None of it. I thought you were the most wonderful future mother-in-law, so generous and supportive. I bragged about you to my friends, told them how lucky I was that Garrett's mom was so involved and excited about our wedding." The pain in her voice is genuine, and I realize that Penelope is as much a victim of Garrett's deceptions as I am. She opens the folder and pulls out the first document, a printed conversation history from her phone. "These are the text messages Garrett showed me from you," she says, sliding the phone across the table. "I never questioned them because why would someone fake something like this?" I scroll through the conversation thread, and my blood runs cold. The messages appear to be from my phone number, but the words are nothing I would ever write. "Penelope, sweetie, I'm so excited about contributing to your special day. The venue deposit has been taken care of. Consider it my gift to you both. Just transferred another $15,000 for the catering. Garrett is my only child, and I want his wedding to be perfect. Don't worry about the flowers, honey. I've already arranged payment with the florist. You focus on being beautiful on your wedding day." Each message is signed with little heart emojis, something I've never used in my life. But they're coming from my actual phone number, appearing in Penelope's message history as if I'd sent them personally. How is this possible? I ask, showing her my phone. These messages aren't in my sent folder. I never wrote any of this. Penelope wipes her eyes with a napkin. My uncle explained it to me yesterday. Garrett has some kind of app that lets him send messages from other people's phone numbers. He's been impersonating you for months, creating an entire fictional relationship between us. The violation feels even deeper than the financial theft. Garrett hasn't just stolen my money, he's stolen my voice, my personality, my relationship with his fiancée. Every warm interaction Penelope thought she'd had with me was actually manipulation orchestrated by my son. There's more, Penelope continues, pulling out printed emails. He's been forwarding me messages supposedly from your email account too. The emails are even worse than the text messages. They show me discussing wedding details with enthusiasm, offering specific dollar amounts for various expenses, even expressing concern about whether Penelope felt welcomed into our family. One particularly painful message, dated just 2 weeks ago, shows me supposedly writing, "Penelope dear, please don't let Garrett worry about the money. I've been saving for his wedding since he was a little boy, and nothing would make me happier than seeing you both start your marriage without financial stress." I've been saving for his wedding since he was a little boy. The lie is so specifically cruel because it transforms my actual sacrifices. The money I saved for his education, his opportunities, his future, into willing contributions toward expenses I never agreed to cover. I believed every word, Penelope whispers. I told my parents how generous you were, how excited you were about the wedding. My mother kept saying she'd never seen a future mother-in-law so involved and supportive. I felt so lucky. She pulls out another document, a printout of our joint savings account with Garrett. This is where all the money went. Every loan, every credit card cash advance, every wire transfer from the accounts he opened in your name. I thought it was money you'd given us willingly. The account shows deposits totaling over $80,000 across the past 8 months, all traced back to fraudulent accounts opened in my name. But it's the withdrawal history that tells the real story of how that money was spent, and it wasn't all wedding expenses. $15,000 at Prestige Motors for his car down payment, $8,000 at high-end restaurants and bars, $4,000 at a luxury spa weekend I thought was a surprise from his work bonus, $6,000 at designer clothing stores. Penelope's voice breaks as she reads the list. We've been living off stolen money for months, and I had no idea. She reaches into her purse and pulls out a small velvet box, placing it on the table between us. The engagement ring. I can't wear it knowing how it was paid for. My uncle says it should be returned to help pay down the debts. The ring box sits there like a symbol of everything that's been destroyed. Not just my financial security, but Penelope's dreams, her trust, her belief in the man she thought she was going to marry. When did you find out? I ask. Yesterday, after my uncle finished his investigation, I confronted Garrett last night. Her voice turns bitter. He tried to convince me that this was all normal, that families help each other with wedding expenses, that you'd be fine with it once everything was sorted out. When I told him I knew about the forged signatures and the fake messages, he got angry. The way she touches her wrist unconsciously tells me everything I need to know about how angry Garrett got. My son, the man I raised to respect women, has been violent with his fiancée too. He grabbed me, she admits, confirming my suspicion. Said I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand how families work. Then he stormed out, and I haven't seen him since. Where is he now? I don't know. He's not answering his phone. He's not at the apartment. I think he knows it's all falling apart. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rings. Garrett's name appears on the screen, and both Penelope and I stare at it. After 4 rings, I answer. Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. We need to meet and discuss this situation rationally. His voice carries the same entitled confidence it always has, as if nothing has changed, as if I haven't discovered the full scope of his crimes. The situation? I repeat, aware that Penelope is listening to every word. You mean the $93,000 in fraudulent debt you created in my name? There's a pause, and when he speaks again, his tone has shifted. Mom, you're being dramatic. Yes, I borrowed some money, but it's all going to be paid back after the wedding. Penelope's family has connections. I'm getting promoted at work. You forged my signature, Garrett. You opened credit cards and took out loans in my name without my permission. You've been impersonating me for months, sending fake messages to Penelope. I was trying to make things easier for everyone. You would have said no if I'd asked directly, but you'll be happy about it once you see how beautiful the wedding is. The wedding is canceled, Penelope says loudly enough for him to hear through the phone. Another pause, longer this time. When Garrett speaks again, his voice has turned cold. Penelope? You're there with her? What lies has she been telling you? No lies, Garrett, just the truth. Your uncle showed me the bank records, the forged documents, everything. Penelope, baby, you don't understand. My mother is trying to sabotage our wedding because she's jealous that I'm starting my own family. She's always been controlling, always wanted to keep me dependent on her. I've seen the fake text messages, Garrett. I know you've been impersonating your mother. I know about the loans, the credit cards, all of it. The silence stretches long enough that I wonder if he's hung up. Then his voice comes through the phone with a venom I've never heard before. You ungrateful bitches, both of you. After everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed. Mom, I gave you purpose for 25 years. Being my mother was the only meaningful thing in your pathetic life. And Penelope, I made you relevant. Before me, you were just another rich girl with nothing interesting about her. The verbal assault continues for another minute, his voice escalating as he attacks both of us with increasing cruelty. When he finally runs out of insults, I speak into the silence. Garrett, I'm filing criminal charges against you today for identity theft, fraud, and assault. You need to turn yourself in. You wouldn't dare. I'm your son. You stopped being my son when you forged my signature and stole my future. I hang up before he can respond. Across the table, Penelope is crying again, but this time there's something that looks like relief mixed with the grief. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Morrison. I'm sorry I believed his lies about you. I'm sorry I didn't question where the money was coming from. I'm sorry you lost your son because of me. You didn't lose me, my son, Penelope. His choices did that. And you have nothing to apologize for. You're as much a victim as I am. As we sit in the coffee shop, surrounded by the normal bustle of people living honest lives, I realize that this confrontation has clarified something important. The man who just spent 5 minutes verbally abusing both his mother and his fiancée isn't someone I raised. He's someone who's been hiding behind a carefully constructed mask for years, possibly his entire adult life. But now the mask is off, and everyone can see who Garrett Morrison really is. The question remaining is what he'll do now that his crimes have been exposed and his victims are united against him. The voicemails start at 2 a.m. and continue every 30 minutes until dawn. 23 messages total, each one more desperate and manipulative than the last. I listen to them over my morning coffee, documenting the escalating tactics that reveal the true depth of Garrett's psychological manipulation. Mom, I know you're upset, but think about what you're doing. Filing criminal charges against your own son? What will people at school think when they find out the principal's son is in jail? Your reputation will be ruined. Message number 4 shifts to financial threats. You realize that if I go to prison, you'll never get that money back, right? The only way you see a penny is if I'm free to work and pay you back. You're cutting off your nose to spite your face. By message number 8, he's moved to emotional manipulation. I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately. How disappointed he'd be to see you destroying our family like this. He always said family comes first, no matter what. Would he want you to send his son to prison? The reference to his father, a man who abandoned us when Garrett was 3, is particularly cruel. Garrett knows I've always carried guilt about raising him without a father figure, always wondered if I was enough. Now he's weaponizing that insecurity, creating fictional paternal disapproval to make me question my decision to seek justice. The most disturbing message comes at dawn. Mom, I've been driving around all night thinking about what you said. I keep thinking about that bridge over Miller's Creek, the one where Tommy Henderson had his accident senior year. Sometimes when everything feels hopeless, that bridge seems like the only solution. I hope you can live with yourself if something happens to me. The suicide threat is delivered with calculated precision, specific enough to seem real, vague enough to provide deniability. It's designed to trigger my maternal instincts, to make me believe that seeking justice for his crimes will somehow make me responsible for his death. But as I listen to the progression of messages, I notice something that chills me more than the threats themselves. Garrett's voice never wavers. There's no genuine emotion, no real distress. Each message is performed with the practiced skill of someone who's used these tactics before, someone who knows exactly which emotional buttons to press to achieve compliance. My phone rings again at 7:30 a.m. This time it's my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kellerman, her voice shaky with concern. Patricia, dear, there's a young man in your driveway who says he's your son. I didn't want to bother you, but he's been sitting there for over an hour, and he seems quite distraught. Should I call someone? Through my bedroom window, I can see Garrett's BMW parked sideways across my driveway, blocking my ability to leave for work. He's sitting on my front steps, head in his hands, the picture of remorse and desperation. It's a performance designed for the neighbors, a public display meant to portray him as the suffering son of a heartless mother. When I don't emerge from the house, he begins knocking on the door. Not pounding, that would alarm the neighbors, but persistent, rhythmic knocking that he knows will eventually force me to respond. Mom, please, I know you're in there. We need to talk about this like adults. I'm not leaving until you hear me out. The implied threat is clear. He'll make a scene, force a public confrontation, embarrass me in front of my neighbors and potentially my colleagues, if word gets back to the school. It's a hostage situation, disguised as a family reconciliation. I call the police instead. Officer Rebecca Martinez arrives within 15 minutes, but by then Garrett has transformed himself again. When she approaches him, he's the picture of a concerned son, polite and articulate, explaining that he's simply trying to reconcile with his mother after a family misunderstanding. Officer, I appreciate you coming out, but this is really a private family matter. My mother and I had a disagreement about wedding expenses, and I'm just trying to work things out with her. Through my window, I watch him employ the charm that's fooled so many people for so many years. His posture is respectful, his tone reasonable, his explanation plausible. To someone who doesn't know the full story, he looks like a dutiful son trying to repair a relationship damaged by financial stress. When Officer Martinez knocks on my door, I show her the restraining order application I'd prepared the night before, along with photos of my bruised jaw and printouts of the threatening voicemails. Ma'am, based on this documentation, I can remove him from your property, she says after reviewing the evidence. But you should know that he's telling a very different story out there. What kind of story? He claims you've been struggling with depression and paranoia since losing your job, that you've been making false accusations against family members, and that he's concerned about your mental health. The accusation hits like a physical blow. Not only am I not losing my job, but I'm one of the most respected principals in the district. Yet Garrett has crafted a narrative that paints me as an unstable woman making irrational claims against her loving son. It's sophisticated gaslighting. He's not just trying to make me doubt my perception of reality, he's trying to convince law enforcement and potentially the community that my accusations are the product of mental illness rather than documented crimes. Officer Martinez escorts Garrett off my property, but not before he delivers one final performance. As he gets into his car, he turns back toward my house with tears streaming down his face. Mom, I love you. I hope someday you'll get the help you need, and we can be a family again." The words are spoken loudly enough for Mrs. Kellerman and several other neighbors to hear. It's a masterful piece of manipulation, positioning himself as the loving son of a mentally ill mother who's sadly rejecting his attempts at reconciliation. By 10 a.m., I've received 3 phone calls from concerned colleagues at school. Somehow, word has spread about the family crisis involving accusations and police involvement. The story being circulated doesn't mention identity theft or financial fraud. It's being framed as a family dispute where an unstable mother is making false claims against her devoted son. Dorothy from the teacher's lounge is the most direct. "Patricia, honey, we've all heard something's going on with Garrett. I know family conflicts can be stressful, but are you sure you want to involve the authorities? Sometimes these things are better worked out privately." The implicit message is clear. My colleagues believe I'm overreacting to normal family drama, that I'm the one escalating a situation that should be handled with understanding and forgiveness. They don't know about the $93,000 in fraudulent debt, the forged signatures, the systematic identity theft. They only know what Garrett wants them to know, that a mother and son are having problems, and the mother is being unreasonable. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Janet Reese from Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about the family dispute involving financial allegations. Can you comment on your son's claims that you've been struggling with mental health issues?" The media involvement is the final escalation. Somehow, Garrett has managed to get a news reporter interested in what he's framing as a story about mental health, family dynamics, and false accusations. He's trying to destroy my reputation preemptively, to make me the unreliable narrator of my own victimization. But the most disturbing call comes at lunchtime from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the district superintendent. "Patricia, I've been hearing some concerning reports about personal issues affecting your judgment. I want you to know that the district supports you, but we may need to discuss a temporary leave of absence while you sort out these family matters." A temporary leave of absence. The phrase sounds supportive, but it's actually a professional death sentence. Once doubt is cast on a principal's judgment and stability, returning to full authority becomes nearly impossible. Garrett isn't just trying to escape consequences for his crimes. He's trying to destroy my career, my reputation, and my financial stability. The pattern becomes clear as the day progresses. Garrett has spent the morning systematically contacting anyone who might influence my decision to pursue criminal charges. He's calling family friends, professional colleagues, neighbors, anyone who might pressure me to reconsider or work things out privately. Each conversation follows the same script. He's the concerned son of a mentally unstable mother who's making wild accusations because she can't cope with normal family financial stress. He positions himself as worried about my well-being, heartbroken by my irrational behavior, hopeful that with time and professional help, we can rebuild our relationship. It's gaslighting on a community-wide scale, an attempt to isolate me from support systems by convincing everyone around me that I'm an unreliable narrator of my own experience. If enough people believe I'm mentally unstable, my accusations of fraud and identity theft become easier to dismiss as paranoid delusions. The voicemails continue throughout the day, but now they're accompanied by messages from mutual acquaintances who've been convinced to act as intermediaries. His friend Marcus from college leaves a message saying Garrett is devastated by my accusations and asking if there's anything he can do to, quote, facilitate healing. A former coworker calls to say she's concerned about me and wants to know if I need someone to talk to about family stress. Each well-meaning attempt at intervention is actually part of Garrett's campaign to reframe his crimes as my mental health crisis. He's not just resisting accountability, he's systematically destroying my credibility and support network to ensure that even if I pursue legal action, no one will believe me. By evening, I realized that Garrett's resistance isn't just about avoiding prison, it's about completely reversing our roles in this narrative. He wants to transform me from his victim into his victimizer, From the mother he defrauded into the unstable woman who's destroying a loving family with false accusations. The sophistication of his manipulation reveals something terrifying. This isn't desperation or panic. This is a calculated campaign executed by someone who spent years studying how to manipulate people's perceptions and emotions. The son who could forge my signature so skillfully, who could impersonate my voice so convincingly, who could construct such elaborate lies about my enthusiasm for his wedding, that person is now turning all those skills toward destroying me entirely. But what he doesn't realize is that his very sophistication is evidence of his guilt. No innocent person could execute such a comprehensive campaign of manipulation. Every lie he tells, every ally he recruits, every false narrative he spreads, only proves that he is exactly the kind of person who would commit the crimes I'm accusing him of. The question is whether I have the strength to withstand his psychological warfare long enough for the truth to prevail. At 6 a.m. Saturday morning, I sit in my car outside the Riverside Police Department, gathering courage for what I know will be the most difficult conversation of my life. In the passenger seat lies a banker's box filled with documentation, bank statements, forged signatures, recorded voicemails, photographs of my bruised jaw, and a detailed timeline of Garrett's crimes spanning over a year. Detective Luis Rodriguez greets me in the lobby, his weathered face kind but professional. He's been working financial crimes for 15 years, according to the information Officer Martinez provided when she helped me schedule this appointment. As we walk to his office, I notice the walls lined with commendations and photos of him with various community groups, someone who's earned respect through consistent dedication to justice. Mrs. Morrison, I've reviewed the preliminary report from Officer Martinez and the documentation from Detective Chen at the bank. I want you to know up front that family financial crimes are among the most complex cases we handle, but also some of the most important. His office is small but organized, with case files stacked neatly on his desk and a whiteboard covered with phone numbers and case notes. He gestures for me to sit in the chair across from his desk while he opens a fresh legal pad. Before we begin the formal statement, I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared for what pursuing these charges might mean? Your son could face significant prison time. Identity theft and fraud at this level typically result in 5 to 10 years minimum. The question sits heavy in the air between us. 5 to 10 years. I try to imagine Garrett in prison, imagine the son I raised learning to survive in an environment I can barely comprehend. For a moment, maternal instinct wars with the need for justice. Detective Rodriguez, 3 days ago, I would have done anything to protect my son from consequences. But the man who committed these crimes, who punched me in my own kitchen, who spent the last 2 days trying to convince my community that I'm mentally ill, that's not the son I raised. That's a criminal who needs to be stopped. Detective Rodriguez nods and begins taking detailed notes as I walk through the evidence chronologically. The initial discovery of missing money, the revelation of forged credit applications, the fake text messages sent to Penelope, the systematic pattern of theft spanning months. With each detail, his expression grows more serious. The sophisticated nature of this fraud is actually helpful for our case, he explains. The fake messaging app, the intercepted mail, the gradual escalation of credit limits. This shows premeditation and planning. It's not impulsive spending or a one-time mistake. He photographs each document with a specialized camera, creating an official evidence file. When we reach the recorded voicemails, he listens through headphones, occasionally pausing to transcribe specific quotes. The suicide threat in message 14 is particularly significant, he says. It establishes a pattern of emotional manipulation designed to prevent you from reporting his crimes. We see this frequently in family fraud cases. The perpetrator uses familial bonds as a weapon against their victim. After 3 hours of documentation, Detective Rodriguez explains the next steps. We'll coordinate with the bank fraud investigators and the district attorney's office to file formal charges. Given the amount of money involved and the interstate nature of some of these transactions, federal authorities may become involved as well. Federal authorities. The scope keeps expanding, reminding me that Garrett's crimes extend far beyond our family conflict. He's committed felonies that affect financial institutions, credit reporting agencies, and potentially other victims I haven't even discovered yet. There's something else I need to tell you, Detective Rodriguez says as we conclude the interview. Your son came here yesterday afternoon, wanting to file a report about your erratic behavior and, quote, false accusations. He presented himself as a concerned family member worried about your mental state. The manipulation attempt even extended to law enforcement. What did you tell him? Nothing specific, but I documented his visit. The fact that he came here trying to discredit you before you filed charges actually supports your case. Innocent people don't typically try to preemptively undermine their accusers. Leaving the police station, I feel drained but oddly relieved. The evidence is now in official hands, and Garrett's attempts at manipulation have been documented as part of his pattern of deception. My next stop is the law office of attorney Michael Ashworth, where Penelope is waiting with additional evidence she's gathered. She looks better than she did at the coffee shop. Her hair is styled, her clothes are professional, and there's a determined set to her jaw that reminds me of myself at her age. Mrs. Morrison, I've been thinking about what you said about not being responsible for Garrett's choices, and you're right, but I am responsible for making sure his other victims know what he's done. She opens her laptop and shows me a spreadsheet she's created. I've been going through our shared expenses for the past year, cross-referencing them with the fraudulent account information. I found patterns that suggest you're not his only victim. The spreadsheet reveals transactions at 3 different jewelry stores, suggesting Garrett may have purchased expensive items for other women using stolen funds. Multiple high-end restaurant charges for dates that don't correspond to times when he was with Penelope. Hotel charges in cities where neither of them traveled. I think he's been using the fraudulent credit cards to finance relationships with other women, Penelope says, her voice steady despite the pain this revelation must cause. The patterns suggest he's been systematically deceiving multiple people, not just us. Attorney Ashworth reviews the evidence and explains how it strengthens the criminal case. This establishes a broader pattern of fraud and deception. It's not just family financial conflict. It's systematic criminal behavior affecting multiple victims. He hands me a business card for a victims' rights advocate named Maria Santos. I've worked with her on several complex fraud cases. She can help coordinate with other potential victims and ensure your rights are protected throughout the legal process. My afternoon appointment with Maria Santos takes place at the Riverside Victim Services Center, a building I've driven past hundreds of times without really seeing. Inside, the atmosphere is professional but warm, designed to help people process trauma while navigating legal systems. Maria is a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the calm demeanor of someone who's helped countless people through situations like mine. Her office walls are covered with thank you letters and photos of families who found justice with her assistance. Mrs. Morrison, the first thing I want you to understand is that what you're experiencing, the guilt, the self-doubt, the tendency to minimize your son's crimes, these are normal responses to family betrayal. You're not responsible for protecting him from the consequences of his choices. She explains the victim services available to me: counseling support, assistance navigating the legal process, help dealing with credit agencies to clear the fraudulent debts, and protection from further victimization. One concern I have, based on Detective Rodriguez's report, is your son's escalating behavior. The public manipulation, the attempts to discredit you professionally, these suggest someone who's becoming increasingly desperate. We need to consider additional safety measures. Maria helps me file for an emergency restraining order that extends beyond just my property to include my workplace and any venues where school functions might occur. She also connects me with a credit monitoring service that will alert me immediately if anyone attempts to open additional accounts in my name. The other thing we need to discuss is media management, she says. Your son has already tried to involve local news in his version of events. We should prepare a factual response that protects your privacy while ensuring the truth is available if needed. By evening, I have a team of professionals working to protect my interests and pursue justice. Detective Rodriguez handling the criminal investigation, Attorney Ashworth managing the civil aspects of fraud recovery, and Maria Santos coordinating victim services and safety planning. But the most important ally I've gained is Penelope herself. As we leave the Victim Services Center together, she turns to me with a determination I hadn't seen before. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that I'm prepared to testify against Garrett in court. I'm prepared to share every lie he told me, every fake message he showed me, every time he manipulated my feelings to cover his crimes. He used me to hurt you, and I won't let that stand. Her commitment to truth and justice, despite the personal cost of destroying her engagement and wedding plans, reminds me that not all young people are like Garrett. Some still understand the difference between right and wrong, between loyalty and enabling criminal behavior. That night, I receive a voicemail from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the district superintendent. But this time, her tone is different. Patricia, I owe you an apology. I've learned more about the situation with your son, and I realize I jumped to conclusions based on incomplete information. Please know that the district fully supports you during this difficult time, and your job is absolutely secure. If you need time for court proceedings or legal matters, we'll accommodate whatever schedule works best for you. The turnaround is remarkable but not surprising. Truth has a way of emerging when people take time to examine evidence, rather than relying on first impressions and gossip. As I prepare for bed, my phone is silent for the first time in days. No threatening voicemails, no manipulative text messages, no false concern from people Garrett has recruited to his cause. The silence feels like victory, evidence that he's realizing his psychological warfare tactics have failed. But I know this quiet is temporary. When Garrett learns about the criminal charges, when he understands that his victims have united against him and that law enforcement is building a case, his response will likely escalate beyond anything I've experienced so far. The difference is that now I'm not facing his manipulation alone. I have allies, evidence, and legal protection. Most importantly, I have clarity about who he really is and what he's capable of, knowledge that will protect me from falling for his future attempts at emotional manipulation. Tomorrow, the formal charges will be filed. Tomorrow, Garrett will learn that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed against the person who loves you most. Tomorrow, justice begins. The arrest warrant is served at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I'm not there to witness it, but Detective Rodriguez calls me at 7:15 to confirm that Garrett has been taken into custody at his apartment without incident. The relief I feel is immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in weeks, I know exactly where my son is, and I know he can't hurt me or anyone else. He seemed genuinely shocked, Detective Rodriguez tells me, kept insisting there must be some mistake, that family disputes shouldn't involve law enforcement. Even when we read him the charges, identity theft, fraud, forgery, assault, he maintained that this was all a misunderstanding that would be cleared up once people understood the full story. The full story. Even facing felony charges, Garrett continues to believe he can manipulate the narrative, convince authorities that he's the real victim of circumstances beyond his control. By 9 a.m., I'm sitting in the district attorney's office with prosecutor Angela Hayes, a sharp woman in her 50s who specializes in financial crimes. She's laid out the evidence in neat stacks across her conference table: bank records, forged documents, recorded threats, witness statements from Penelope and myself. Mrs. Morrison, I want to be direct with you about what we're facing, Prosecutor Hayes begins. Your son's attorney, David Chen, I note this is a different Chen than the bank investigator, is already calling this a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He's arguing that parents routinely help with children's expenses, that signatures on family financial documents are often informal, that this is civil matter rather than criminal fraud. The familiar manipulation tactics, now being deployed through the legal system, but Prosecutor Hayes doesn't look concerned. The strength of our case lies in the systematic nature of the fraud and the fact that he tried to impersonate you to cover his tracks. The fake text messages to Penelope, the intercepted mail, the suicide threats to prevent you from reporting. These establish criminal intent beyond any reasonable doubt. She opens a thick file folder. We've also been in contact with the FBI. The interstate nature of some of these transactions, particularly the credit cards used in multiple states, may qualify this for federal prosecution. If that happens, we're looking at significantly enhanced penalties. Federal prosecution. The words carry weight that makes the reality of Garrett's situation finally sink in. This isn't a family dispute that will be resolved with apologies and repayment plans. This is serious criminal behavior that could result in decades in prison. What happens next, I ask? Arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning. He'll be released on bail. His attorney has already arranged that. But there will be conditions. No contact with you, no access to any financial accounts, surrender of passport. And Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand that once he's released, his behavior may escalate. Facing serious criminal charges can make desperate people do dangerous things. The warning proves prophetic. By Thursday afternoon, 3 days after his arrest, the first sign of Garrett's escalation appears in my email inbox. It's a message from a law firm I've never heard of, Hartwell and Associates, informing me that I'm being sued for defamation, emotional distress, and malicious prosecution of my son. The lawsuit, filed in civil court while his criminal case is pending, claims that I've fabricated evidence against Garrett out of maternal jealousy over his engagement, that my accusations have destroyed his reputation and career prospects, and that I've weaponized the legal system to punish him for becoming independent. Attorney Ashworth reviews the civil lawsuit and dismisses it immediately. This is a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into dropping the criminal charges by threatening expensive civil litigation. Most judges see right through these tactics, especially when they're filed by someone facing criminal charges for the exact behavior they're claiming is fabricated. But the lawsuit serves another purpose beyond intimidation. It allows Garrett to continue his public relations campaign, now with official legal documents that frame him as the victim of a vindictive mother. Within hours of the filing, his friend Marcus is posting on social media about how concerned he is about my mental state, and how sad it is to see a loving family destroyed by false accusations and legal manipulation. The social media campaign expands rapidly. Posts appear on neighborhood forums questioning my fitness as a school principal, suggesting that someone who would attack their own child might not be trustworthy with other people's children. Anonymous comments appear on the school district's Facebook page, asking why they continue to employ someone, quote, going through such obvious psychological problems. It's character assassination disguised as community concern, and it's being orchestrated with the same systematic precision that Garrett used to steal my money and impersonate my communications. But this time I'm prepared. Maria Santos has helped me document everything. Screenshots of false social media posts, records of anonymous phone calls to the school district, copies of misleading information being spread through community networks. More importantly, she's helped me coordinate a response that uses truth as a weapon against Garrett's lies. The first counterattack comes from an unexpected source. Penelope's uncle, attorney Michael Ashworth, holds a press conference outside the courthouse following Garrett's arraignment. He's flanked by Penelope, myself, and Detective Rodriguez, presenting a united front of victims and law enforcement. The Morrison case represents one of the most systematic examples of family financial fraud our office has encountered, Attorney Ashworth states. Mr. Garrett Morrison didn't simply overspend or make poor financial decisions. He committed identity theft, forgery, and fraud, totaling over $90,000 against his own mother, then attempted to cover his crimes through intimidation, threats, and a campaign of character assassination. The press conference is covered by 3 local news stations and the Riverside Times. The coverage is factual, professional, and devastating to Garrett's narrative of being a misunderstood victim. Real evidence trumps manipulative storytelling when presented clearly and comprehensively. The second phase of our response targets the civil lawsuit directly. Attorney Ashworth files a motion to dismiss the defamation suit, accompanied by a countersuit for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The countersuit seeks not only dismissal of Garrett's frivolous claims, but also monetary damages for the cost of defending against them. Your son's biggest mistake was putting his lies in writing, Attorney Ashworth explains as we review the countersuit documents. Every false claim in his lawsuit can be disproven with bank records, police reports, and documented evidence. He's essentially provided us with a detailed list of provable lies he's told about you. The third phase is the most satisfying. Using the victim advocacy resources Maria Santos provided, I file complaints with every institution where Garrett attempted to spread false information about my mental state or professional competence. The school district receives a formal report documenting his campaign to undermine my career. The neighborhood association gets copies of the fraudulent social media posts. The local news stations receive comprehensive fact sheets correcting the false narratives being circulated. But the most effective response comes from an unexpected ally, Drive. James Peterson, the forensic accountant the district attorney's office hired to analyze Garrett's financial crimes. Dr. Peterson's report, released to support the criminal prosecution, provides a devastating analysis of the systematic nature of Garrett's fraud. The document traces every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every fake communication, presenting them in a timeline that reveals the calculated planning behind each crime. The defendant's financial crimes demonstrate sophisticated premeditation, Dr. Peterson writes. The gradual escalation of credit limits, the systematic interception of mail, the creation of false communications. These actions required months of planning and consistent deception. This is not impulsive behavior or family financial stress. This is criminal enterprise executed against a family member. The report becomes public record, available to anyone who wants to understand the true scope of what Garrett has done. Within days, the social media posts questioning my mental state disappear. The anonymous calls to the school district stop. The whispered conversations about family drama are replaced by expressions of support and outrage on my behalf. The power shift is complete when Garrett's employer, Brennan Marketing, terminates his employment. The company releases a brief statement, citing, quote, criminal charges involving fraud and deception as incompatible with their ethical standards and client relationships. Without his job, facing mounting legal fees, and with his reputation destroyed by documented evidence of his crimes, Garrett's position becomes increasingly desperate. The man who once threatened me with physical violence and attempted to destroy my career is now unemployed, facing decades in prison, and completely isolated from the community he tried to turn against me. But perhaps the most significant shift occurs when his landlord serves him with an eviction notice. The luxury apartment in Riverside Heights, the symbol of the lifestyle he maintained through theft, is no longer affordable without steady income. The physical manifestation of his crimes, the expensive possessions, the upscale address, the appearance of success, begins to crumble as quickly as it was built. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after his arrest, I receive a call from Detective Rodriguez with news that completes the power reversal. Mrs. Morrison, we've identified 2 additional victims. Other women who were dating your son over the past year, both of whom had financial irregularities they couldn't explain until they heard about your case. One had fraudulent charges on her credit cards totaling $8,000. The other discovered unauthorized loans taken out in her name for $15,000. Two more victims. Two more women whose trust and financial security Garrett destroyed to fund his elaborate deceptions. The pattern is now undeniable. This wasn't about wedding expenses or family expectations. This was systematic predatory behavior targeting the women in his life who cared about him most. Both women are filing charges, Detective Rodriguez continues. Combined with your case, we're looking at federal prosecution for a pattern of identity theft and fraud spanning multiple victims and states. The federal prosecutor is confident about seeking a sentence of 15 to 20 years. 15 to 20 years. The son I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything to give opportunities to, will likely spend the next 2 decades in federal prison for crimes committed against the people who loved him most. As I hang up the phone, I realize that the power shift is complete. Garrett went from being my beloved son to my attacker to my criminal tormentor. Now he's simply a defendant facing justice for documented crimes, no different from any other criminal who exploits the trust of innocent victims. The woman who was punched in her kitchen 3 weeks ago for refusing to fund her son's wedding has become the key witness in a federal fraud case that will likely send him to prison for decades. The victim has become the agent of justice, and the perpetrator has become just another criminal facing the consequences of his choices. Tomorrow, the consequences phase begins in earnest. The dominoes begin falling on a cold November morning, 6 weeks after Garrett's arrest. I'm grading papers in my office when Maria Santos calls with news that brings both satisfaction and a strange sadness I wasn't expecting. Mrs. Morrison, I thought you should know that Garrett's civil lawsuit against you has been dismissed with prejudice. The judge called it frivolous litigation designed to intimidate a crime victim and ordered him to pay your legal fees. Attorney Ashworth estimates that will be about $12,000. $12,000 that Garrett doesn't have, can't borrow, and has no legal way to obtain. The lawsuit that was supposed to pressure me into dropping criminal charges has instead become another financial burden he can't escape. But the legal victory is just the beginning of a cascade that reveals how thoroughly Garrett's world is collapsing. That afternoon, I receive an unexpected visitor at school. Thomas Brennan, the owner of Brennan Marketing, appears in my office wearing the kind of expensive suit that suggests his company's success. He's a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who's built a business through careful judgment of character. Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to apologize in person for not seeing what your son was doing while he worked for my company, he begins, settling into the chair across from my desk. We've been conducting an internal investigation since his arrest, and what we've discovered is deeply troubling. He opens a leather portfolio and removes several documents. Garrett was stealing from us too. Not money directly, but he was using company resources to support his fraudulent activities. Our phones for personal long-distance calls, our computers to create fake documents, our mailing address to receive credit cards he opened in your name. The revelation shouldn't surprise me, but it does. Even while committing crimes against his own mother, Garrett was expanding his theft to include his employer. The pattern of boundary violation was truly comprehensive. More concerning is what we found in his office computer, Mr. Brennan continues. Email drafts addressed to several of our female employees, apparently attempting to manipulate them into romantic relationships or financial arrangements. We believe he was planning to expand his fraud scheme to include coworkers. The predatory behavior extends beyond family and romantic partners to workplace colleagues. Women who trusted him professionally were being targeted for the same systematic manipulation and financial exploitation that he'd used against Penelope and me. We're cooperating fully with the federal investigation, Mr. Brennan assures me, and I want you to know that our entire company supports your decision to pursue justice. What he did to you, to his fiancée, to those other women, it's unconscionable. As Mr. Brennan leaves, I realize that Garrett's crimes have created ripple effects I never imagined. His former employer is now conducting internal investigations, reviewing personnel policies, and probably questioning their judgment about other employees. His actions have consequences that extend far beyond our family. The next wave of consequences comes through Penelope, who calls me that evening with updates about the Ashworth family's response to the scandal. My parents have hired a private investigator to make sure Garrett hasn't committed any financial crimes against our family, she tells me. They're also having our family attorney review every business transaction where Garrett had access to information about our restaurants or hotels. The Ashworth family's caution is well-founded. As someone who was planning to marry into their family, Garrett had access to sensitive financial information about successful businesses. The same skills he used to forge my signature and open fraudulent accounts could easily have been turned toward corporate identity theft or business fraud. The investigator found something disturbing, Penelope continues. Garrett had been researching my family's business credit lines and asking questions about our accounting procedures. My uncle thinks he was planning to expand his fraud scheme to include our family businesses once we were married. The wedding wasn't just about expensive celebration. It was about gaining legal access to the Ashworth family's financial resources. Marriage would have given Garrett legitimate reasons to know account numbers, signatures, and business procedures that he could have exploited for much larger thefts than what he perpetrated against me. By the end of November, Detective Rodriguez provides updates about how the criminal case is affecting Garrett's remaining relationships. His college friends, initially supportive when they believed his story about family misunderstandings, have distanced themselves as evidence of his crimes becomes public. His former roommate Marcus came to the station yesterday, Detective Rodriguez tells me during our weekly update call. Apparently, he's been reviewing old financial records since your son's arrest and found several unexplained charges on shared credit cards from when they lived together. Small amounts, but consistent with the pattern we've documented in your case. Even his closest friendships were vehicles for financial exploitation. The loyal friend who initially defended Garrett on social media is now another victim, discovering that trust was systematically violated for monetary gain. Marcus is filing charges too, Detective Rodriguez continues. The federal prosecutor says this establishes an even clearer pattern of predatory financial behavior spanning multiple years and victim categories. The consequences extend to Garrett's housing situation as well. His landlord, Mrs. Chen, another different Chen from the others in this story, appears at my house on a Saturday afternoon seeking information about her former tenant. Mrs. Morrison, I hope you don't mind me coming by, but I wanted to let you know what your son did to my property before he was evicted, she says, clearly agitated. The apartment was damaged, holes punched in walls, cabinets torn off hinges, mirrors broken. He caused thousands of dollars in damage before moving out. The physical destruction of property suggests someone in the grip of rage at losing control. The careful, calculated criminal who'd spent months systematically stealing and manipulating had devolved into someone who expressed frustration through violence against inanimate objects. I'm filing a civil suit against him for the property damage, Mrs. Chen continues, but I also wanted to warn you. When I went to serve him with the damage claim, his new apartment neighbors told me he's been talking about how his family betrayed him and how he's going to make things right once his legal troubles are resolved. The threat is vague but concerning enough that I call Maria Santos, immediately after Mrs. Chen leaves. Within hours, the restraining order against Garrett is expanded to include any discussion of me with third parties, and Detective Rodriguez adds extra patrol coverage around my house and school. But perhaps the most devastating consequence comes through the Victim Services Network that Maria Santos coordinates. As word spreads about Garrett's systematic fraud patterns, other women begin coming forward with similar experiences. Rachel Morrison, no relation, despite the shared last name, contacts Detective Rodriguez about a man she briefly dated 18 months ago who convinced her to co-sign for a car loan, then disappeared from her life immediately after the loan was approved. The description she provides matches Garrett perfectly, and bank records confirm that the loan payments were made from accounts that were later determined to be fraudulent. Jennifer Walsh reports a similar experience from 2 years ago. A charming man who convinced her to let him use her address for temporary mail forwarding while he was between apartments. She later discovered that multiple credit cards and loans had been approved using her address, though the debt was never connected to her because he'd used fake identification with her address information. Sarah Thompson tells Detective Rodriguez about expensive gifts she received from a boyfriend who claimed to work in marketing, gifts that she now realizes were probably purchased with stolen money or fraudulent credit cards. When she tried to return the jewelry after their relationship ended, the store informed her that the original payment method had been disputed as fraudulent. Each new victim reveals the same pattern: Garrett identifying women with good credit, stable employment, or valuable personal information, manipulating them into romantic relationships, exploiting their trust to gain access to financial resources, then disappearing once the theft was complete or the relationship became inconvenient. By December, the federal prosecutor's office has identified 8 separate victims across 4 states, with total fraud amounts exceeding $230,000. What began as a case about wedding expenses and family conflict has become one of the largest identity theft prosecutions in the district's history. The cascade of consequences has transformed Garrett from a charming young man with expensive tastes into a documented serial predator who systematically targeted women for financial exploitation. His former life, the job, the apartment, the friendships, the engagement, the family relationships, has been completely destroyed by the natural results of his own criminal choices. But the most profound consequence may be the one that's hardest to quantify: the complete destruction of his ability to manipulate and deceive. Every person who once trusted him, every institution that once extended him credit, every community that once welcomed him now has documented evidence of his true character. The man who once convinced me that I was a supportive mother funding my son's happiness, who convinced Penelope that she was marrying someone generous and loved, who convinced employers and friends and landlords that he was trustworthy and responsible, that man no longer exists in any meaningful way. All that remains is Garrett Morrison, federal defendant, facing decades in prison for crimes that have hurt dozens of people and destroyed every relationship he ever claimed to value. The consequences are still cascading, but the pattern is clear. When someone systematically betrays the trust of everyone around them, eventually there's no one left to betray, nowhere left to run, and no story convincing enough to escape the truth. Tomorrow, the final phase begins, his last desperate attempts to escape accountability and my final tests of the strength I've built throughout this nightmare. The letter arrives on a Tuesday morning in February, delivered by hand to my office at school. It's written on expensive stationery, the kind Garrett always favored for special occasions, and my name is written across the front in his careful handwriting. Inside is 6 pages of what appears to be heartfelt confession and desperate pleading. Mom, as I sit in my temporary housing, facing the reality of what I've done, I finally understand the magnitude of my mistakes. The federal prosecutor has made it clear that I'm looking at 15 to 20 years in prison, and for the first time in my life, I'm truly afraid. The letter is masterfully crafted, acknowledging specific crimes while framing them as mistakes born of desperation rather than calculated predatory behavior. He admits to forging my signature but claims it was because he panicked about disappointing Penelope. He confesses to the fake text messages but insists they reflected his, quote, genuine belief that I would want to contribute once I understood how important the wedding was to him. I know I hurt you, physically and emotionally, and there are no words to express how sorry I am for raising my hand to the woman who sacrificed everything for me. That moment in the kitchen wasn't who I really am. It was the action of someone drowning in stress and poor decisions. The psychology is sophisticated. He's not denying the crimes anymore, but he's reframing them as temporary moral lapses by someone who lost his way, rather than systematic predatory behavior by someone who targeted multiple victims over years. It's an attempt to revive the narrative of the good son who made bad choices, rather than accepting the reality of the criminal who was finally caught. The other charges the other women who've come forward. I know how it looks, but you have to understand that I never meant to hurt anyone. I was trying to build a life, to become the man you raised me to be, and I made terrible decisions about how to achieve those goals." The letter continues for pages, mixing genuine-sounding remorse with subtle manipulation. He mentions his fear of prison, his regret about destroying our relationship, his realization that money isn't worth losing family. But threaded throughout are implicit requests for me to intervene on his behalf, to speak to prosecutors about his character, to provide testimony about his good qualities, to help minimize his sentence. The final paragraph reveals the true purpose of the letter. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm hoping you might find it in your heart to write a letter to the judge about the son you raised, the man you know I can be again. Your word would mean everything to the court, and it might be the difference between me having a future or spending the rest of my life in prison." A character reference letter. After everything he's done, the theft, the violence, the systematic manipulation, the destruction of multiple women's financial security, he still believes he can convince me to advocate for him in court. I read the letter 3 times, looking for any sign of genuine remorse that doesn't serve his self-interest. I search for acknowledgement of the harm he's caused that doesn't minimize his responsibility or request something in return. I find none. Instead, I notice the careful word choices designed to manipulate my emotions, references to how proud he used to make me, reminders of childhood memories we shared, subtle implications that abandoning him now would make me complicit in destroying the son I worked so hard to raise. That afternoon, Maria Santos reviews the letter with me and points out manipulation tactics I'd missed. "Notice how he never actually apologizes to the other victims by name," she observes. "He acknowledges that women were hurt, but he doesn't take responsibility for targeting them specifically or admit to planning the systematic fraud. He's still trying to control the narrative." She's right. Garrett mentions mistakes and poor decisions, but never uses words like crimes or victims or predatory behavior. Even in his supposed confession, he's attempting to minimize and reframe rather than accept full accountability. The second attempt at reconciliation comes through Father Michael Patterson, the priest at St. Catherine's, where Garrett and I attended services throughout his childhood. Father Patterson calls me on a Thursday evening, his familiar voice carrying the gentle authority I remember from Garrett's confirmation ceremony. "Patricia, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but Garrett has been coming to see me regularly since his arrest. He's asked me to speak with you about the possibility of forgiveness and healing. The use of religious intermediary is calculated. Father Patterson married my parents, baptized Garrett, presided over countless family milestones. He represents the authority of faith and tradition, institutions that emphasize forgiveness and family reconciliation above justice and accountability. He's told me about his mistakes, Patricia, and he seems genuinely remorseful. I know what he did was wrong, but I also know the young man I watched grow up in our parish. Sometimes people lose their way, but that doesn't mean they can't find redemption." Father Patterson's intervention is more subtle than Garrett's letter, but equally manipulative. He's not asking me to drop charges or minimize testimony, but he's appealing to my religious upbringing and maternal instincts to consider mercy over justice. "I'm not asking you to excuse what he's done," Father Patterson continues, "but I am asking you to consider whether there might be room for healing alongside accountability. Perhaps a mother's forgiveness might help him find his way back to the man God intended him to be." The conversation continues for 20 minutes, with Father Patterson skillfully weaving together themes of Christian forgiveness, family obligation, and redemptive possibility. He never directly asks me to take specific action, but the implication is clear. A good Christian mother would find a way to show mercy to her son, regardless of his crimes. After I hang up, I realize that Garrett has identified my potential vulnerabilities: my faith, my maternal instincts, my tendency to see the best in people, and is exploiting them through trusted intermediaries who genuinely believe they're advocating for reconciliation and healing. The third attempt comes through Penelope. which surprises me because she's been steadfast in her commitment to testifying against Garrett. She calls me on a Friday evening, her voice careful and measured. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to tell you about something that happened today. Garrett's mother came to see me." Garrett's mother. For a moment, I'm confused until I remember that Penelope never knew the details of Garrett's father leaving when he was 3. In her mind, there must be another parental figure somewhere who could provide the family healing that the crisis requires. I explained that you're his only parent, that there is no other mother, and she seemed shocked. She said Garrett had told her his mother had died years ago, and that you were his stepmother, who never really accepted him. Another lie, another manipulation designed to create sympathy and alternative narratives. Even facing federal charges, Garrett is still constructing false stories to evoke pity and justify his behavior. She said she was his father's sister, his aunt, and that she'd been trying to help him through this legal trouble. She wanted to know if I thought you might be willing to meet with family members to discuss, quote, healing and moving forward together. Garrett's father has no sister. His father's family cut off all contact when he abandoned us, showing no interest in Garrett's welfare throughout his childhood. This supposed aunt is either another of Garrett's victims who's been fed lies about our family situation, or she's a paid accomplice helping him manipulate the reconciliation process. I told her I didn't think that was appropriate, and that she should speak with you directly if she wanted to make contact. But Penelope, the conversation made me realize something important. Penelope pauses, and I can hear her choosing her words carefully. Even facing prison, even after all the evidence has been presented, Garrett is still lying to new people and creating elaborate schemes to avoid accountability. The woman I was going to marry never existed. The man who wrote me love letters and planned our future was just another performance by someone who lies as naturally as breathing. Her realization mirrors my own. The son I thought I raised, the man I believed Garrett was beneath his criminal behavior, is also a fiction. There is no good person temporarily lost who might be redeemed through forgiveness and family support. There is only the predator who's been revealed through his actions, someone for whom manipulation and deception are fundamental character traits, rather than recent moral failures. The final test comes through an unexpected source. My own conscience. Late at night, reading Garrett's letter again, I find myself wondering if I'm being too harsh, too unforgiving, too focused on justice at the expense of mercy. The maternal instincts that drove me to sacrifice for 25 years don't disappear overnight, even when confronted with evidence of his true nature. I wonder if writing a character letter might acknowledge the complexity of someone who committed terrible crimes, but was also once a child I loved completely. I consider whether emphasizing his potential for rehabilitation might serve justice better than maximum punishment. I question whether my anger and hurt are preventing me from seeing possibilities for healing that might benefit everyone involved. But then I remember Rachel Morrison, Jennifer Walsh, Sarah Thompson, and the other women whose trust and financial security Garrett destroyed while I was believing in his fundamental goodness. I remember Penelope, who spent months planning a wedding to someone who was systematically stealing from multiple victims to finance their relationship. I remember the sophisticated planning revealed in Dr. Peterson's forensic report, the calculated interception of mail, the practiced forgery of signatures. The man who wrote the letter requesting my character reference is the same man who forged my name on loan documents, who punched me in my kitchen, who tried to destroy my career through community manipulation, who targeted women across multiple states for systematic financial exploitation. There is no good man temporarily lost who deserves redemption. There is only the criminal who was finally caught, still trying to manipulate his victims into helping him escape consequences. The test of my strength, my judgment, and my commitment to justice is whether I can maintain clarity about who Garrett really is, despite the emotional manipulation of letters, religious appeals, and my own maternal instincts. As I put his letter away without responding, I realize I've passed the final test. The mother who would have sacrificed anything for her son's happiness has become the woman who will sacrifice those same maternal instincts for justice and protection of future victims. Tomorrow, the resolution begins. not with reconciliation, but with the clarity that some betrayals are too complete for forgiveness and some people are too dangerous for mercy. The sentencing hearing takes place on a bright May morning, exactly 1 year after Garrett first asked me for that wedding loan. I sit in the federal courthouse between Maria Santos and Penelope, surrounded by 7 other women whose lives Garrett systematically destroyed while I was celebrating what I thought was his success. Judge Catherine Wells presides with the dignified authority of someone who's seen every variation of human cruelty and manipulation. When she asks if I wish to provide a victim impact statement, I stand with steady legs and speak directly to the man who was once my son. Your Honor, for 25 years I believed I was raising a good man who would contribute positively to the world. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own security, my own relationships, to give him every opportunity to succeed. What I actually raised was someone who viewed my love as weakness to exploit and my trust as a resource to steal. I don't look at Garrett as I speak, focusing instead on Judge Wells, whose expression remains professionally neutral as I continue. The defendant didn't just steal money from me and 8 other women. He stole our ability to trust, our sense of safety in relationships, our faith in our own judgment. He used our love against us, weaponized our generosity, and turned our desire to support him into the mechanism of our own victimization. My voice remains steady throughout the statement, surprising myself with the strength I've found over these months of legal proceedings and personal rebuilding. I request that this court impose the maximum sentence allowable by law, not for revenge, but for protection. The defendant has demonstrated that he views other people as resources to exploit, rather than human beings deserving of respect. Every woman he targeted trusted him completely, and he repaid that trust with systematic theft and manipulation. When I finish and sit down, Penelope squeezes my hand. Around us, the other victims nod their agreement. We've become an unlikely sisterhood, bound together by shared experience of betrayal and united in our commitment to ensuring Garrett faces full accountability. Judge Wells sentences him to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The courtroom is silent as she explains that the sentence reflects not just the financial crimes but the systematic targeting of vulnerable women and the sophisticated planning required to execute such comprehensive fraud. Mr. Morrison, you had every advantage: a loving mother, good education, professional opportunities, the support of people who believed in you. You chose to repay that investment by preying on the very people who cared about you most. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the need to protect society from your particular brand of manipulative predation. Garrett's only reaction is a slight nod. No tears, no emotional outburst, no final plea for mercy. Even facing 18 years in prison, he maintains the controlled composure that allowed him to manipulate so many people for so long. As court adjourns, I realize I feel neither triumph nor sadness, just profound relief. The chapter of my life dominated by his crimes and their consequences is finally closed. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the garden of my new house in Maplewood, a quiet neighborhood 30 minutes from Riverside where nobody knows my story unless I choose to share it. The house is smaller than my previous home, but entirely mine. No memories of violence in the kitchen, no photographs of a son who never really existed, no reminders of the woman I was when I still believed love could overcome any problem. Penelope visits regularly, having become the daughter I never had. She's thriving in graduate school, studying victim advocacy with plans to help other women navigate the legal system after financial crimes. Her engagement ring was sold to help pay restitution to Garrett's victims, but she wears a simple gold band that represents her commitment to rebuilding her life on authentic foundations. Mrs. Morrison, I got the final restitution check yesterday, she tells me over afternoon tea. The federal marshals have sold everything. His car, his remaining possessions, even the expensive watch he bought with your stolen money. It's not much compared to what he took, but it's something. The restitution amounts to roughly 30 cents on every dollar Garrett stole. But that's not why we pursued justice. We pursued it to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else, to establish legal precedent for similar cases, and to reclaim our own sense of agency and worth. My new job as superintendent of the Maplewood School District brings challenges and satisfactions I never experienced in Riverside. Here I'm known for my expertise in education, rather than as the mother of a federal criminal. My colleagues respect my judgment and leadership without whispering about family drama or questioning my mental stability. The strangest aspect of my new life is the absence of anxiety about money. For the first time since Garrett's birth, I'm not budgeting around someone else's needs or expectations. My salary covers my modest expenses with money left over for small luxuries: books, plants for the garden, occasional dinners out with new friends who knew nothing about my previous life until I chose to share it. Maria Santos remains a close friend and occasional collaborator. Together, we've developed a program for financial institutions to help identify and prevent family fraud. The Morrison Protocol, as it's informally known, has been adopted by banks across 3 states and has prevented dozens of cases similar to mine. The most important thing we learned from your case, Maria explains during one of our quarterly meetings, is that family fraud is often more sophisticated and more damaging than stranger fraud because it exploits emotional bonds as well as financial trust. The victims stay silent longer, question their own perceptions more deeply, and face greater social pressure to resolve things privately rather than seeking legal protection. Our prevention program focuses on education rather than suspicion, teaching people to recognize the early signs of financial manipulation, to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, and to understand that protecting themselves from fraud doesn't make them bad family members. Dorothy, my former colleague from Riverside, calls occasionally to update me on school district news and to express ongoing bewilderment about Garrett's crimes. "I still can't believe it, Patricia. He seemed like such a devoted son. How could someone fool so many people for so long?" The question reflects a common misconception about manipulative people, that their deception should be obvious to others, that victims bear some responsibility for being fooled. But sophisticated manipulation succeeds precisely because it's sophisticated, because it exploits normal human tendencies to trust, to see the best in people we care about, and to rationalize away inconsistencies that threaten our understanding of important relationships. The reason Garrett was so successful at deceiving people, I tell Dorothy, is that he studied us carefully and told us exactly what we wanted to hear. He presented himself as the son I'd always dreamed of raising, the fiancée Penelope thought she deserved, the employee his boss wanted to hire. He wasn't just lying, he was creating custom-designed personas for each relationship. On quiet evenings in my garden, I sometimes think about the son I thought I was raising, the boy who helped me bake cookies, who cried when he accidentally broke my favorite vase, who hugged me tightly before leaving for college. That child was probably real, but he was also temporary. Somewhere along the way, perhaps gradually or perhaps in a single moment I didn't recognize, he became someone else entirely. I don't grieve for Garrett the criminal, but I do grieve for the mother I was when I believed in him completely. That woman's faith and optimism were beautiful, even if they were ultimately misplaced. She deserved better than what her love produced. The most profound change in my new life is my relationship with trust itself. I no longer assume that love guarantees honesty or that family bonds prevent exploitation. But I also haven't become cynical or suspicious. Instead, I've learned to trust gradually, to verify claims that seem inconsistent, and to maintain my own financial and emotional independence regardless of how much I care about someone. Last month, I started dating Dr. Michael Harrison, a widowed professor of literature at the local college. He knows my full story and has shared his own experience of rebuilding life after loss. Our relationship developed slowly, built on consistent actions rather than romantic promises, on demonstrated character rather than charming words. "The beautiful thing about starting over at our age," Michael says as we walk through downtown Maplewood after dinner, is that we know ourselves well enough to recognize what's real and what's performance. As spring turns to summer, I realize that the woman I've become is stronger, wiser, and more authentic than the woman I was before Garrett's crimes destroyed my illusions. I no longer define my worth through someone else's success, or measure my love by how much I'm willing to sacrifice. I've learned the difference between supporting someone and enabling them, between forgiveness and accountability. My story has become part of victim advocacy training programs, law enforcement education, and financial crimes prevention initiatives. Other women contact me regularly, seeking advice about similar situations with sons, husbands, or family members who've exploited their trust. The hardest part, I tell them, isn't facing the truth about what they've done. It's accepting that the person you thought you loved may never have existed at all. But once you accept that, you can start building relationships based on reality rather than hope, on demonstrated character rather than potential. The wedding that started this nightmare never happened, but in its place, I've built something more valuable, a life based on truth, independence, and authentic connections with people who've earned my trust through consistent actions rather than manipulative words. Some people ask if I ever wonder what would have happened if I'd just given Garrett the money he requested that evening in my kitchen. The answer is simple. I would have funded more crimes, enabled more victims, and remained complicit in his predatory behavior, while other women suffered what I eventually suffered anyway. The punch that shattered my jaw also shattered my illusions, and that was ultimately a gift. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living in a beautiful lie that enables harm to continue. As I sit in my garden this evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I understand that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before trauma occurred. It means becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more authentic than you were capable of being before you were tested by circumstances you never could have imagined. The woman who was once defined by her devotion to a son, who exploited that devotion, has become a woman defined by her courage to choose truth over comfort, justice over enabling, and authentic love over manipulative performance. And for the first time in decades, that feels like exactly who I was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.